I want to thank all of you guys for coming out here. I know it's like a beautiful sunny day here in Vancouver, so we're kind of fighting up against a lot here. Can we just get, sorry, can we get that muted? I think we've got someone, yeah. So just make sure everyone would keep your mics muted. So yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day, and we're kind of, this is kind of what we're fighting against, but it's just amazing to see that you guys are all coming out here and despite all this, still able to participate and come together for all this. So I want to thank you guys for being here. My name is Christoph. I'm the founder of the Vancouver Psychedelics Meetup, and this is our 17th meetup and our 6th in the webinar series, which is something we're trying to get back pretty soon to the physical spaces. But for right now, we're going to keep going with the webinar series as is. Just want to let you guys know a couple of things. Firstly, we do have a chat that's available, and it's open to members to join. It's for our community, and we can kind of keep this conversation going with things like psychedelics and sort of where that's going. And there's a really great community behind it. So I recommend those of you who are interested, definitely just shoot me a message about this after, and we can give you the next steps how to get into the chat. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the layout, we're going to have our two guest speakers, Ken and Paul, and they're going to do their presentation on psychedelic experience and the nature of reality. Then there's going to be a Q&A portion, at which point people can ask messages. I'll actually have Ken just kind of get a little bit of a detail of how you can go about asking your questions, or how you can do it in a way that, like, what kind of rules we have around that, and how you can ask it anonymously. So what I'm going to do is basically we're going to have, since Ken is also doing the presentation, Ken's going to be doing part of the moderating, but also we're going to have Peter, who's going to help sort of facilitate this as well. So what I'll do right now is I'll actually pass it over to Ken, and then Ken can just go over a couple of the ground rules, and then I'll go and introduce our speakers for today.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a couple of details as mentioned. Kind of, if you've been here a few times, this will be repetitive, but for anyone new, we want to make sure everyone is clear on what's happening here. So as mentioned, we are recording this meeting. There's a few different ways to maintain try to maintain your privacy as best as possible. The first would be to change your name in Zoom. It is possible to do that by going to the participants panel and clicking on your name. You can change your name. You could remove your last name. You could completely change it to whatever you want. Make something fun, whatever you want to do. You also, have the option to turn off your video as well. There's no requirement to keep your video on or off. Again, we are recording, but none of the faces of anyone other than the presenters will be shown in those if we ever do share recordings. So do keep that in mind. Your privacy is pretty well maintained, but do keep in mind, we're doing the best we can, our best effort, and we'll if we make a mistake, we cannot guarantee, we certainly cannot guarantee privacy. So just keep that in mind. The next thing is in order to ask any questions during this particular meeting, we're gonna let questions potentially, if they're kind of pertaining to what the topic is while we're talking about it, you can ask questions via the chat, and I'll be keeping my eye on that, and I could potentially bring those up into the discussion. And then, as always, we will have some Q&A after the kind of the formal portion of the presentation. The way after, so you can type into the chat during, and then afterwards, if we will allow a portion for people to ask questions via audio as well. So you can use the raise hand function, which is also in the participants panel, and I will see your name there, or Peter will see your name there, and we can unmute you and allow you to ask your question and go back and forth, which would be good. And then the only other thing is just to make sure that, make sure your mic is muted. Also, if you're running around or like walking down the street or whatever, it's probably better off to turn off your camera. And lastly, if you do have audio issues, if your Wi-Fi connection isn't great or whatever, there is a dial-in option. So if you go to the join audio button, you can see like a phone call, or in the meetup invitation, there is like numbers you can dial into, so you could figure that out too. Then we will be doing a breakout session after the Q&A. We'll take like a 2 or 3 minute break for anyone to refresh their drink and use the restroom, and then we'll come back, and depending on the time we have left, we will do 1 or 2 breakout sessions depending on the time. The first one would be kind of timed, maybe 20-30 minutes. The second one will be let to go as long if we only do one, we'll just let it go as long as anyone wants to hang out and whatnot. But anyway, that's kind of it. So that's kind of the details. If anyone has any questions on any technical things, you can ask in the chat and we'll try to help. But yeah, back to you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, thanks, Kenny. Before I introduce our two speakers for today, I wanted to just make a quick little announcement and just share something. So just this past week, I had an article that I wrote that was published to a medical audience, which was basically introducing psychedelics to a medical audience for the first time in a national magazine in Canada. And it was something that actually was very well received, but I had a lot of apprehension and I was very nervous about coming out with this because in a sense, this was a little bit of a coming out for me. And I know that seems a little bit strange because you say, hey, Christoph, like you've been doing this psychedelic meetup for well over a year now, like what are you coming out about? But the thing is that for me, this was something that, well, apart from being very well received, I was like very apprehensive about because most of the people that know about any of my passion towards psychedelics has been largely people that are in a close circle of friends, or as far as I've gone is maybe sharing some articles on Facebook and things like that. It's not the kind of thing that my work colleagues really knew about or anything like that. So this was sort of a big step for me. And it's something I wanted to share because I didn't expect to be so well received. Like the positivity I've gotten back from work and from colleagues and from everyone with regards to this research and people coming up to me. I've had people emailing me, asking me questions about this and sharing stories and their experiences. And I think that was something really, really positive and I didn't really expect it to turn out this way. So I did want to kind of share that, you know, sometimes like when we open up this kind of space and it allows these kind of conversations to take place, that it's something that actually really can turn out really positive. And I wanted to share that with you guys. So thank you for everyone who's supported me with this as well. So with that being said, I want to introduce our two guest speakers for today. So both our members, Paul and Kenny, are longtime members of the Meetup. They've been here for a very long time and very active in our community. Firstly, Paul Goddard, he's a passionate explorer of consciousness and culture and someone who takes a holistic approach of self-experimentation study, conversation, and spiritual practice to uncover experiential insights into the human nature. He has an undergraduate degree in electronics and anthropological studies, where by day he works as a biomedical technician and by night as a contemplative psychonaut. His interest in these topics started with a series of mystical experiences in his early 20s, and most recently has continued with integration work using an increased diversity of plant medicines. And along with that, Kenny has a background in technology and an unending thirst for knowledge. His recent focus on improving his mental health brought him to the world of healing through multiple modalities, such as meditation, psychology, and Hakomi. His explorations of consciousness have been primarily experiential, so he is looking forward to picking up Paul's brain to learn more about the topic more formally. So with that, I give you our two guest speakers today. Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you. So, hey everybody, we're going to try something a little different today, where this is going to be more of like almost like an interview format. Paul is the super deep diver on this stuff, and I'm kind of a rookie here. So I'll have some informed questions for him and some discussion. But if any of you had caught the talk that I had done a few months ago on psychedelics, consciousness, ego death, this is kind of a continuation of that discussion. And if for any of you who may have missed that, we are planning on releasing some recordings in the future. So hopefully that'll help you get caught up or whatever. But basically, yeah, we're gonna try this out. Basically, what we had kind of gotten to there, just to do a quick catch up, is talking about, you know, psychedelics, meditation, consciousness. What is consciousness? What is the sense of self? And so as we kind of take that to the next level, there's a whole lot of science and confusion and uncertainty and you know, around what is consciousness, how does it work, and what do we know about it? And we thought that and psychedelics can definitely be a tool to help explore and to learn things about it. So we're kind of continuing that forward into that. So I'm gonna just as mentioned, for anyone who didn't catch it, if anyone has questions during the talk, you can pop them in the chat. I'll keep an eye out if they're making if they fit in with what we're talking about. We can bring them in here, and there will be a QA session afterwards. So to kick it off here, Paul, we've got a couple terms that we talked about that kind of are involved with this area of discussion: monoism, dualism, and then panpsychism and emergentism. So I guess you decide kind of the way you want to start here, by defining these terms in what order or not. And maybe that's the best way to get started here, to kind of get people familiar with that terminology and what they are, and then we'll talk about next how they differ from each other.
Sure. And just to let everybody know, I've got my house is being shown today, so somebody might knock on my door and kind of disrupt me. Hopefully they're not. I locked it, so we'll see. But if that happens, I want to apologize right now. Okay, yeah, so all those terms, right? Tons of terms. First, I would actually like to preface everything that's being said here with an analogy. And also, I would like to say hi to everybody. Welcome. So my analogy is our side view mirror in your car. We all drive cars, presumably. I don't know if anybody notices some of the rear view mirrors. I don't think they say it anymore. I'm not sure, but they used to say objects in mirror are closer than they appear. That's a guide, right? And so there's two sides to this talk, which are going to be experience and knowledge, or experience and intellect. And in this analogy, both are playing. So we have our experience, which is what we see in the side view mirror, and then we have this qualifying factor that is pure intellectualization, which is objects may appear closer than they appear. That's modifying our experience. In that analogy, we don't see a separation between those two. We don't see a problem. We don't be like, oh, the words are fake and the experience is real. So the experience is fake, which would be weird to say, and the words are what's real. They go together seamlessly. So I just want to throw it out there. I'll probably reference it. Okay, so the nature of reality. What a big ass term, right? Jesus Christ, what the hell am I doing? Okay. So there's two major themes that I've come across, and in no way going to answer all questions today, probably just create more, and maybe I'll just sound confused in the meantime. I don't know, hopefully not.
That's part of the fun.
Yeah, right. So I'm just gonna give it my best. So there's two kind of sides that maybe there's more, but from my experience that pop up is that what is the nature of reality? What is the kind of fundamental nature of reality? And the two options that pop up is that reality is mind or consciousness on one side, and then reality is matter on the other side. So it's kind of these two sides kind of duking it out all the time. I tend to try in life to find the good in everything and just trying to find some sort of middle ground. So that's what I'll end up doing today. My analogy is kind of a template for that. So first, we'll just kind of go into what is panpsychism, which is basically that means reality is mind, and what is, I would say materialism, is the more hardcore assertion that life is matter. That neglects consciousness quite a bit. In fact, some hardcore materialists even doubt the nature that consciousness is real at all, which is kind of weird because, we're having an experience, so they have to, they don't seem to try to parse that too much. So what I'm going to do is go with what's called emergentism, which is a physicalist-based perspective that also accounts for consciousness. So the two ideologies that we're working with here are panpsychism and emergentism. And I also want to preface both of these that these are kind of descriptions about reality. They're not direct experience necessarily. These are reflections. These are kind of the objects in the mirror may be closer than they appear. When we get into psychedelic experience more, I'm going to play around with the difference between descriptions of reality and experience of reality, more direct experience of reality. So I'll start with panpsychism. Just to make this part succinct, I wrote things down just so it goes quick. Okay, so panpsychism holds that consciousness or mind is a fundamental or ubiquitous feature of reality. Different versions say that either reality is only consciousness with global and local expressions, or that consciousness is a fundamental force coexisting alongside particle physics, where smaller bits of consciousness move alongside electrons, or, I'm not quite sure how they specifically do it, but it's something like that. And then as life gets more complex, they are along with the ride and congeal to allow us or grant us to have this experience of consciousness that we have and other creatures have. Excuse me. Some believe that interiority, so the sense of what it's like to be something, or sentience maybe is another way to put it, or mind, goes all the way down, like from us, presumably we have mind, down to rocks. The others believe that that fundamental level, rocks, they only have a very primitive form of consciousness. So that's kind of the scope of the beliefs in panpsychism.
So real quick, just to interrupt there a little bit, if we said that, like, maybe we should define consciousness a little bit in this context, like in terms of, like, if a rock has, and please, if this makes sense to address later on, let me know. But like, if a rock has consciousness and an animal has consciousness versus a human having consciousness, my perspective would be that when I define consciousness there, it's just that each one of these things, each one of these beings has the ability to experience something. Yeah. And so in that case, consciousness is actually the same across all of those creatures or whatever things. I'm not sure if I believe that a rock is conscious in the first place, but if they were, if it was, that it just has the ability to feel, to experience anything that, and then in that case, the amount of consciousness that each has would be the same. But that doesn't sound like that's what you're referring to here, and that one might have more sophisticated consciousness. So if it makes sense to answer this now or later, let me know.
I'll answer some of it now.
That's something that,
yeah, because I have my own definitions of consciousness. I'm definitely not a professional philosopher or anything. I don't know all the different definitions for consciousness. One of those is just what you were referencing. Thomas Nagel is the famous person who put it out in the 90s or 80s or something like that, which is in his essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? So there's something it's like to be something. Annika Harris, Sam Harris's wife, also put out a book that she used that definition as well, which is the definition I believe you were just operating with. To me, that would be sentience. That would be a complex form of consciousness. For my definitions of consciousness are just consciousness itself is not sentience. Consciousness for me is the ability to sense and respond. Just that simple.
Okay.
Essentially, a bacteria has consciousness, so it can sense light or dark, and it has got a little flagella, and it can swim away or swim towards the light or whatever it wants to do. That would be, to me, the most fundamental form of consciousness. For me, a rock doesn't have that ability. It doesn't seem to have that ability. It doesn't seem to sense things and run away or attack or do something with it. So I would say that doesn't have consciousness. Maybe it has a sense of proto-consciousness, and that the fact that it can even structurally interact with anything, that's a prerequisite for consciousness, because to sense something, you have to interact with it. So maybe I could say, I would go so far as maybe say it's proto-consciousness or something like that.
So right from the beginning, we have a disagreement. I love it. This is going to be fun.
So, and then more that, for me, sentience is consciousness of consciousness, or consciousness. Yeah, pretty much it starts with consciousness of consciousness. So that would be sensation and responding to sensation and responding. And as it gets more complex, I would say basic consciousness does not have interiority. And then as it complexifies, once you start having sensation of sensation, and along the way in the complexity, you might have remembrance of that sensation, like some sort of storage. So now, at that point, then as it gets more complex and more complex, now you start to have this sense of interiority, which is a simulated reality. So I don't want to go any further than that. That fleshes it out quite a bit from my perspective.
I'm gonna get one more clarification point. Would be when you, maybe a different way to put it around consciousness of consciousness would just be kind of like knowledge that you have these sensations. Like you are aware that you are aware of things.
Yes.
You have a knowledge that, oh, okay, yeah, I can see, I can smell, I can act, I can do things or whatever. So you're aware of the ability that you have, versus like potentially you could have a flower it turns towards the sun. So you could say it might have a form of consciousness potentially, because it is aware of a thing and then it reacts. Like, it is aware of the sun, it feels heat and it turns towards that heat or turn towards that light, but it might not know that it's doing it. Whereas I know that I feel this touching this site or whatever. So that's kind of that's how I differentiate between that. Does that line up with what you're getting at?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, cool. I just want to give a little bit of context, just like a few sentences on the context for panpsychism. This is something that I learned in preparing for this talk, is that holy crap, is it common? Just in our modern world, it's not that common. But that's actually a new thing just from reading the Wikipedia article, honestly. So let me just read a few things here. Basically, panpsychism was a major force in the 1800s. Logical positivism, which is the kind of foundational theory for science, for evidence-based science, kind of pushed it out. Basically, before this, though, I mean, it goes, let's see, panpsychism goes all the way back to the beginning of philosophy, because even Thales, which is Aristotle considers Thales to be the first Greek philosopher, so we're talking about thousands of years ago, held a form of panpsychism. Like Stoicism, Neoplatonism, versions of Christianity, Gnosticism, a lot of these major kind of old Western philosophies were basically panpsychic in many ways. Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Arthur Schopenhauer, Spinoza, Leibniz, William James. Sorry if people don't know these names, but these are big names in philosophy and psychology. They all pretty much ascribed to it to a more or less degree. So it fell out of favor when science started kicking off in the late 1800s. It got started again only recently, in the 1990s, by a guy named David Chalmers, who postulated the hard problem of consciousness. Now, the hard problem of consciousness, in case you don't know, it really starts off when we start doing neuroscience and we start trying to figure out what the brain is doing and how it's involved with consciousness. And he said that the easy problem is figuring out how, like, vision works or how hearing works, like what neurons go to our ear and where do they go and how do they work. That's the easy problem, which that's fucking ridiculously hard. Sorry, I confess, so just let you know. That's insanely hard. But that's the easy problem. So the hard problem is we're basically meat in a box. Like, we have this, box frame and we've got meat all around it, and somehow that creates interiority. There's a non-intuitive gap there that leaves a WTF moment inside of a lot of us. Crossing that gap is what he considers the hard problem of consciousness. So once he postulated that, gave it a name, now panpsychism is back on the map. So broader context, so that's in the West. In the East, basically Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, all this stuff, that's their basic thing, So in Hinduism, in Advaita Vedanta, the nature of Brahman is often conceived as pure consciousness. In Buddhism, Buddha nature is considered to be undefiled mind, and actually everything is considered to be undefiled mind. Everything has a Buddha nature. Lastly, indigenous communities, pretty much across the entire world, hold that there's a spiritual dimension to all things. In fact, they say that there are spirits in those things. This is generally referred to as animism. It does have a name. For them, stones aren't just stones, and they're not just consciousness. They are stone people. And I literally heard this just the other day with Pat McCabe, this lady who is both a doctor and a First Nations person. And she was doing an invocation of ceremony, and she was talking to the spirits in the trees and the lake and the stone people. She used those words. So it's very literal to some people. So that's the context of panpsychism. Which that surprised me. I didn't realize it was so pervasive. So now, if there's no more questions, I'll move on to emergentism. Emergentism, first, a real quick history on this. It grew up in the 1800s. There was materialism on one side. I think we all know what that is. And then there's what's called vitalism on the other side. And this is pretty much like everything has a soul or a spirit, which is panpsychism. Emergentism was trying to meet a middle ground between those two. Okay, so it's saying that we can have consciousness without a ghost in the machine, is what they're saying. So the way they went about this was that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. So examples of this are like water. So you have hydrogen and oxygen, both are gases, but when they combined and they're interrelationships, all of a sudden it goes from a gas to a liquid. That's a radical, radical change. And it has nothing to do, it's very unlike their previous conditions, okay? Water is not a gas. So it's like, wow, that happens because of their interrelationships. It's not that the properties of either one of them add together. It's that once they link up, they turn into something completely different. So other examples of this are cellular structures. So as cells become more complex, sensory apparatus and the ability to respond emerges. When you get mammals, so I'm kind of going more complex as I go. Mammals, basically, mammals compared to reptiles are more social. That kind of what defines mammals. They start becoming social, actually. And as that social complexity increases, you get this group hunting, like a wolf pack or us, that didn't emerge before, where you didn't have multiple, individual creatures combining for common goals. That emerged out of the complexity of their social capabilities. And then the last one would be neural complexity. And this is where emergentism and panpsychism is kind of this, they're the two that battle, as far as I can tell. It's not materialism and panpsychism, but it's emergentism. Basically because emergentism says that when you get enough neural complexity in our brains, we have 100 trillion connections in our brain. We have, I forget, 100 billion neural cells with connections between all of them, more than the amount of stars they say that are in the entire universe. So there's an immense amount of sensing going on. And to me, it's the interiority. And so they're saying consciousness emerges from the complexity of neural networks. Yeah, so that's pretty much emergentism.
Yeah, I think my guess is that, and I'd be curious, I didn't think about this before, but there's like a little, there's like a little raise hand feature or like a little yes, no button in somewhere. If anyone wants to play around with those things, I'm curious to see if most people, I would make the assumption that most people fall in that camp of emergentism. Like they just assume that, oh, well, of course, like apes are conscious because they're a lot like us. But of course, a plant is not, because it doesn't have any of the hardware that we have. Like it doesn't have as complex enough of, again, like to make a computer analogy, it doesn't have a powerful enough of a CPU to be able to run the program of consciousness, right? Of consciousness, awareness, right? Yeah. And I certainly came from that place myself, just as, yeah, again, like things like that behave like us, you think they're like us, and then the lower you go, it just, you think at some point it just shuts off. But then when we try, and then maybe this is probably what you're going to get into next, where I always found the fumbling. So I'd be curious to see if anyone wants to throw in the chat like where they stood, if anyone didn't, like based on what we teach in school, I think that's where that comes from. But anyway, the thing that is always curious to me is, like, I think the harder and harder we try to figure that out, and we kind of we fail, we keep failing figuring it out. That panpsychism almost is like well, we have no other choice. We can't figure it out. So maybe everything is conscious. If you can't figure out where to draw the line, then maybe it's everybody. That's kind of like again, my not very informed guess as to how something like that would have come. Because it's just like, well, if I can't define it, if I can't figure it out, then maybe everything is, because I can't say what isn't, so maybe everything actually is. So I don't know if that's kind of the root of panpsychism, but that's where I land, even when I try to just do it on my own.
Yeah, then that actually is what happens. I mean, that's where panpsychism has come in the modern terms. It's like we've got this hard problem of consciousness, and we can't seem to solve it. Nobody says they've really solved it. Some people have tried to say they solved it by basically, Dan Dennett tried to do it in his book called I can't remember the name of his book, Dan Dennett. He basically said that there is no such thing as consciousness, like it's an illusion. So I solved it by getting rid of consciousness. That sounds maybe crazy, but that's just the other move from what you're talking about, which is like, screw it, everything is consciousness, right? That's where we get into this, I'm going to use this term for the first time, compatibilism, which is, compatibilism is when you try to take two opposing theories and say that they're both right without contradicting each other, or some
actually,
level. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So actually, Peter asked a question right there that might make sense here. So he asked, is emergentism not another form of materialism?
It's
This might be jumping ahead. Let me know if that makes sense.
No, that's appropriate because we're talking about emergentism right now. So it is generally, it does say that the fundamental nature of reality is matter. It does say that. And it says that consciousness is essentially just something that matter also does. And that not all matter does it.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a form of materialism. It's compatible with physicalism, but it just tries to account for consciousness. Yeah, I would say it's not as hardcore as the other term is eliminative materialism, which it eliminates consciousness. It's not that though. It's a softer stance, I would say, and it's somewhere towards the two a little bit. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry. So continue on then.
Yeah. So I was going to compatibilism.
Compatibilism. Yeah.
Let's see. Let's see. I forgot a little bit where I was at. Well, okay. So I guess I can go into. So my perspective, what I've displayed now, is kind of the basic perspectives on the playing field.
So before we get into your perspective, to just drill in then one more step on compatibilism, like how is it possible to kind of, I don't want to say believe, but like to be a compatibilist? How is it possible? Like it's either hot or cold. Yes, you could. Okay, that's a bad analogy. Like it's either like electricity is either whatever, like AC or DC. It can't be both, right?
Well, so let's take the hot or cold. So this is just something that came up into my mind. Have you ever noticed that when your hands are cold, really cold, and you come in, you put them under the sink to try to warm them up? You put it under cold water, but it feels really hot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's both cold and hot.
Because it's just about the difference. Yeah, it's always about it's always relative. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you take in the larger picture, it's actually both hot and cold. If you took a temperature with a thermometer, it would be cold, because both your hands are colder than the water, but the water relative to your hands, which is not quite as cold, makes them feel hot. Bam, compatibilism. Okay. So
I guess I've never thought of consciousness, these things being able to both be happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine panpsychism or emergentism both happening, because they seem so completely like the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right. Well, I'll try to give you my take. This is an evolution in process, right? So,
of course,
as far as my own point of view, so I have a weak version and a strong version of this. I'm kind of melding them together. I might meld them together for this actually. Let me go with the stronger version. We'll see if the weak version even comes up. Okay, so one way to say this is that the sense that everything is consciousness and that sense of, or things are matter is what's called an epistemological point of view. Okay, so epistemology is the study of how we know things. So I bring in what's called the bicameral mind, which is the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and these hemispheres have pretty much everything to do, maybe not everything to do, but they're predominantly focused within executive control, so our ability to simulate reality and make choices within a simulated reality. They have two different distinct profiles in how they do so, and they're actually connected in 4 places in our head. The corpus callosum, which is like a big chunk right in the middle, connects the two, so the hemispheres communicate. They have 3 other small little places, and now we've been able to do studies on this because like people with seizures, they find these brainstorms across the hemispheres. So the way that some absolutely insane doctors solve this, they're like, hey, let's cut them apart. So they cut them apart, and so these people have 2 intact separate hemispheres in the same skull. And at first, they couldn't even tell. It was a normal person. They didn't say that they felt different or anything, but they were very different once you test things. And they were able to profile these distinct cognitive styles, they call them. So 1-on-1, like the right hemisphere, it's very socially oriented. It's holistic. It's in the present moment. It does not speak words. It's in tonality. It speaks in pictures, actually. It sees the unique present moment actuality of your sensation. Okay, does that sound familiar? Sound like maybe non-duality or spirituality, or it doesn't sound, it's kind of uncanny that it does. On the other side, the left hemisphere, everything, it sees everything in categories. So it doesn't just see a chair, it sees chairs. You know, it doesn't see that chair, it sees its chairness. It speaks in words, it does math. It's sequential in its orientation, so it's time-based. Okay, so that sounds like a map-making machine. That sounds like science, actually. So for me, one way to put a compatibilism is that these two different opposing conclusions we have are actually two different perspectives. And I compare it to hands and feet. So feet, you know, they both are appendages of the same body, but feet do what feet do and hands do what hands do. There's a little bit of cross-referencing, like people who have lost their legs, they can walk on their hands. Like that looks like it sucks, but they can do it. And then people with those crazy toes, right? They can like pick up stuff and feed themselves, and like, you know, it's nuts. They can, it's a hand-ish, right? So that's the criticism on the bicameral mind, because folk psychology kind of ran away with it a little bit, is that we all use both our hemispheres simultaneously for everything. But we do have cognitive styles, just like we have handedness. So we do go to one side or the other. And these sides actually battle for supremacy on what viewpoint you actually take. The connections that go between them in the corpus callosum are actually primarily about inhibition. Okay, so it's about the right hemisphere saying, no, screw off left hemisphere, my vision, my strategy. You could almost look at it like Republicans and Democrats too. It's like, no, me, no, me, no, me. They're generally fighting for reality. And so I would say that they present two different forms of reality to us. And I would say that reality, and I think psychedelic experience gets into this, is probably bigger than either of these perspectives. So either of these perspectives are actually just the tip of the iceberg. And in a way, from this viewpoint, they're both valid. And they both have something to say, just like hands and feet, both are valid tools, if you will. You wouldn't try to make your hands be your feet and your feet. You want them to be different, and you want them to work together. So that's kind of the general gist. I would say that's my strong argument for compatibilism. It requires mysteriousness. It requires fundamentally that we don't actually know what reality is fully. We have a keyhole view, and that these are two different keyholes that work in different ways. So I don't know if any questions. That's kind of the basic gist. I do have arguments, specific arguments on this to try to flesh it out, but I don't know if you have any responses.
Yeah, I think I want to shift a little bit. It's tough, but I will say that I don't know. This is a kind of a curveball here, in that I've been recently hearing about, just happened to be hearing about like some general theories of everything that people have been talking about, and like all this other crazy science stuff. But like this, one of the things that I learned recently was that while like our kind of normal EMC equals MC squared gravity kind of stuff, like that we think is real, even though it actually starts to fall apart when we look at things like black holes and things happening in space. And it turns out that this whole set of rules and laws are like a subset of the bigger set of rules. And so like almost like it's almost like within a ruler, you have, you know, like your inches, and then and then you can have a half inch, a quarter inch, whatever, and maybe metrics is an easier way to go. You have centimeters and then millimeters, and then, you know, you can keep breaking it down. So like a piece of one of the things that is like within the ruler of the everything is a whole nother set of laws that happens within another set of laws. So I'm wondering if this compatibilism can actually be something like that, in a way that, like, you know, there's consciousness, but it's actually a subset of something bigger, and so that's how you can have multiple things actually be true at the same time, potentially. I don't know.
Sure, that's
cool.
Definitely fair enough. Yeah, and
yeah,
the bad thing about this is that it's not a unified theory of everything, right? It doesn't, like, I could say
certainly
my body, like my analogy to try to make things clear of hands and feet, it's unified by a body. It's serving a body. We could say that these perspectives are serving consciousness, which actually consciousness is kind of devoid of perspective. That's why it can hold multiple perspectives. So you could say that that's the body from which the contents or these perspectives or these tools serve.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I've got a weak version that I can throw out real quick.
You know, given the time that I'm looking at right now, I'd like to make sure that we don't miss kind of another big portion here. So I think we'll want to start to bring in the psychedelic angle here. Where does psychedelics kind of fit into this whole discussion, right? This is we're a psychedelic group, so we want to make sure we kind of touch on that.
Yeah.
And I'll throw out my side of it real quick to kind of get it going.
Real quick, hold on. Let me.
Sure.
Would you mind if I just in a few sentences throw out my weaker version, because I think it might be important.
Yeah, sure. No, if that makes sense, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, real quick. So, and this is the more elaborate thing. So this is going to be a very short version of it. But essentially, another compatibilism is that our experience is 100% consciousness. So the deeper we go and we're getting into psychedelic experience, the more we have a visceral sense that reality is consciousness, because that's what we experience us as.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but my sense is from within that consciousness, from within our experience, I completely agree that everything we experience is consciousness. Within there are patterns within the consciousness that don't follow our sense of what consciousness is. Okay, so it doesn't, like rocks don't have directed behavior. They don't seem to have directed behavior. We're continually surprised by so much. In fact, the more and more and deeper we go into psychedelic experience, the more novel and fresh and just unbelievable everything is. And we realize how much we don't know. All that's just happening. So a lot of this stuff suggests that there is a material world, and matter is spooky. Like I would pull matter back, like matter is 99% air. It's got these quantum non-localities. It's like what the frick is space in the first place? I don't even know. Like there's dark matter. Like matter, to a scientist, like from the scientific description, might as well be spirituality. Like it's, so when you get into the spookiness of it, they really kind of cross over. So for me, our experience is pure consciousness. The greater reality may not just be pure consciousness. It may be also matter. It may be whatever. And we are a part of that greater reality. So that's my weaker form of compatibilism. And so we can go into psychedelic experience. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, you kind of answered. You kind of mentioned what I was going to get at is like what I definitely alluded to this in my my talk is kind of like with if we say that psychedelics kind of have the ability to, I mean, obviously lots of things happen, but when the part that I think applies here is we could have like things kind of turning off, right? We turn off the DMT, the default mode network, or some of the other parts of the brain that maybe control things. And so, we see all these different things, but then, we can see like, okay, we could lose the ability to talk, we lose the ability to touch, whatever. And at some, there are definitely stories out there of folks saying that they kind of lose touch with all their senses and just experience raw consciousness. And so that would certainly, and there's people with psychedelics that do it, people with meditation, other things, that there's just nothing but the ability to be aware. They don't even feel like they have a body anymore. Like you're just like floating in space, like in nothing. Who knows? It's hard to describe. I certainly have not experienced this myself. But the point being, I can see that very strongly pushing an idea of panpsychism, right? Or even just the fact that that the base of our human experience is consciousness, because you can kind of turn everything off, but then there's a something there. And so that's been my kind of where I stand right now as to why that perspective makes sense, because you can kind of, again, you can have this heightened awareness of this consciousness. And when nothing else exists, if you are alive, there is like raw life, which is consciousness. So I could totally understand why that mindset is out there, why that thinking is out there, because the psychedelic experience can very easily show that to you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree with that. So my thoughts on psychedelics, I was almost really thinking of dividing it into light, moderate, and strong experiences with psychedelics, just kind of as a framework. What you were discussing there that would be the deep end of the pool. That's the strong experience, right? And we've been talking about the fundamental experience of reality. Like, what is reality fundamentally? There's a huge aspect of it, which is what is reality relatively? Like, what's all the relative stuff? Like, us relating to ourselves, each other, qualitative experience. You know, that's a nature of reality too. So I'm going to delve into that a little bit, and then we'll get back to the pure consciousness experiences, because those are kind of the deepest culmination of this. So light, medium, and strong. So light is really easy. Like if you have a light experience, like you're doing half a gram or a gram of mushrooms, maybe a gram might be too much, but basically I would say that gives you kind of a gourmet experience of life. It's kind of ego soothing, mood enhancing, and relieves anxiety. When you get into the deeper part of the pool, the possibilities expand exponentially. So a moderate experience would be you have ego permeability and transparency. So the edges don't completely dissolve, but they kind of get transparent and a little porous. So reality outside our sense of reality, our thinking about reality starts to get in, and we start freaking the fuck out. Or we get ecstatic or whatever, you know, all this crazy stuff happens. And I would consider these ecstatic experiences, not just gourmet experiences, but ecstatic. And ecstatic means you're outside of the norm, your ecstasis. You're away from the norm, essentially. So they're ecstatic experiences, which are characterized by extreme bliss. And I mean, when you say the word ecstatic, we think of ecstasy and all that stuff. Yeah, there's extreme bliss, but there's also extreme terror too, as we in the community know, happens from time to time. So I would say in these moderate experiences, there's two perspectives on it. There's the supernatural and the naturalist. The naturalist perspective is that you're opening the unconscious mind, and that it's unbelievable how much is in your unconscious mind. I mean, I think as an analogy, at least, neuroscience is finding that only 3 to 5% of our brain activity they would consider to be conscious, meaning we push a button and, you know, we acknowledge, yes, I'm conscious of that, and they track it. Only 3 to 5% is considered conscious. So that rest of the 95% or some subset of it is emerging to the surface in these moderate psychedelic experiences. And this is where most of our experiences happen. This is the profound forgiveness for our parents or for ourselves, experiencing entities with DMT, you know, that scare the bejesus out of us or give us wisdom, like opening emotions. I know I've had times where I was just bawling for hours because I had a friend who died when I was 19, and I didn't even know I needed to grieve, but it just came out. And so this is the moderate level. And this is a huge part of reality, right? This is the qualitative part of reality, not the fundamental part. And so these really stabilize, they clean us out, they clear the way for these deeper, stronger experiences that we're alluding to, which start to intrude upon what we think is the ultimate nature of reality. So let me go into those. So the strong experiences, you get ego dissolution, and ego is just, it's a lot of things. The word ego is thrown around so much, and it actually means a lot of things. It's like the word sports, whereas Thai boxing or MMA, you know, or blood sports that's a sport, but so is badminton. So like, what the hell are we saying? You know, I'm gonna go do sports for the weekend. I had an ego dissolution. Like, you know, there's so many things involved. So there could be the neutral descriptive sense of self, but there also could be kind of a domestic competitiveness, like sexual competitiveness. I think that we attribute to a lot of the negative aspects of it. So when I see ego dissolution, it's both of those, at least for what I'm going to discuss here, is that our literal ideas about ourselves kind of get suppressed or turn transparent. And our competitiveness, how we hide what we really want so that we can put up a front, so that we can kind of position in the background, and we don't even know we're doing it, and we don't know how much this takes up so many of our CPU cycles. It's ridiculous. So when that stops, consciousness expands and we feel this amazing freedom. When it completely dissolves, just like you're saying, it can get extreme to where even not only does the mind stop, but your senses of your body stop, and you're in a nothingness. And it's not a nothingness that feels like a nothingness. It's an actual nothingness, meaning you really don't even know it occurred until your mind comes back online and you look back and you're like, what the hell just happened? These are kind of the strongest experiences that really give a sense that I've got this quote from Robert Atkins. He was the Zen master for the San Francisco Zen Center. He says, awakening is not about clearing up it's not about clearing up the mystery. It's about making the mystery clear. So in that, these experiences, they don't necessarily answer anything intellectually, but we feel like we've hit the bottom where you can't go further because it's non-dualism in a sense where there is no further. There's no superficial, there's no deep. And people call this many things when they experience this. They say they were consciousness. That's one. They say they were being, or that they were pure mystery, or they say, I'm not going to say anything about it because nothing will do its service. So now that I've kind of swung back around to your point, I agree with you that generally these experiences pretty much universally point people to panpsychism. All the religions express it, period. I haven't found an exception that I know of. So it's the norm, especially when you have these experiences. I would say one thing though, that mind has never really been given, really the Western Enlightenment has really given mind really the superficial process that we have where we conceptualize things and give them these cartoonic, we scribble things on the wall and say, okay, that represents this, E equals MC squared. The trick is that we found a methodological way, a systematic way of checks and balances, and really a lot of humility to find that process of investigating using concepts, and then of course evidence, sensory evidence, can actually also bring up truth. And so for me, my quest is always, I find wherever there's good, I want to preserve it. And so, things like, throwing out the mind, panpsychism tends to be in the more extreme formats, can be like Christian Science or things like that, where they're praying for everything. Or a good example is there's a name that people this name, if you haven't heard this name, is going to explode your brain, but Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Okay, he's a Tibetan, he brought over Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and he started Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. He really was a huge impact on bringing Tibetan Buddhism in. And he was a great teacher in many ways, considered enlightened by his own culture standards. And he did a lot of good, but at the same time, he was a consummate drunk. And he would even drink in his satsangs, and it's this whole crazy wisdom thing. And he's like, my Buddha powers, I'm not getting hurt by the alcohol, because I have Buddha powers, and because I'm tapped into true consciousness and reality is consciousness, I can now control my body. Well, he died from cirrhosis. So that gives us pause that yes, panpsychism is fairly attested to. And when you have these experiences, it literally feels like consciousness, like literally. So it's very impacting. But back to my analogy initially, the rear view mirror, right? If you don't have those guiding thoughts, from your experience of that your rear view mirror, you could think the cars are pretty far away when they're not. So it's important, but that intellectualism should only support your experience. Okay, like, so if you had the rear view mirror without the words, that's fine. You actually might be in quite danger. But if you had the words without the rearview mirror, there was just words there, that would be dumb, right? So direct experience is profound, but mentality, apart from the way things seem, another one is the heliocentric solar system. It looks like the sun goes around the world, the Earth, but we know it's not. And it hasn't changed how it looks at all. So knowledge is extremely powerful. So the fact that our experience can viscerally feel like consciousness in these deepest psychedelic experiences does not guarantee an absolute answer that that's all experience is. But the only way we're going to modify that is not from having more meditation. It's from having better science and integrating science with spirituality, essentially. At least that's my position.
Oh man, I'm very angry at you right now. Because that's all I was gonna do. I was just gonna do more and more psychedelics and more meditation. I would eventually tell them the answer, right? No, I
tell you about yourself.
Yeah, no, totally. No. It's actually I'm totally kidding, but I think that one of the things that I realized one of the analogies that I made in my talk and another way that this can be put is to say, like, I heard a pretty wise teacher say once, if you say the me is the ego and the I is consciousness, this is a very commonly used lingo, is that the I is always seeing the me, seeing the person out, the personality. Consciousness, holds all those things, but the me can never see the I. Like you can't actually turn things around on your, to not on yourself, but to see what consciousness is. You can't actually see consciousness, even though you are it. So like in the same way, that analogy of that I even used, which is like the flashlight is casting out light. The light and the flash and the device are separate things, and the light will never actually, they have to be separate things, and one can see the other. The camera is a better analogy. The camera kind of sees the image, but the image doesn't know anything about the camera. So then in this case, yeah, like what you're saying is, if I keep looking, like if I'm keep meditating, keep using all these things, basically I'm just looking for something that I could never actually see. And so we can't necessarily, see the tools of experience are not necessarily going to just magically give us the answer, because again, we're kind of limited by what we can actually experience. So that does make a lot of sense. The question is, I don't know if the tools of science are going to get us anywhere anyway either.
Well, here's where my analogy comes into play too. The words on the mirror, on the side view mirror, are only an assistance to the experience. So science can never supplant direct experience or meditation. Just like coaching can't play the game. Like we get so egg-headed that we think it's almost like we want to live life where, if we're comparing it to a football event, like they're usually 3 hours long, like 2.5 hours is the coaching, and then 1/2 hour to play the game, if we play the game at all. It's like that's being in your head. The coaching only supports the game, and that's the direct experience. And the direct experience is of consciousness, of the relative nature of our emotions and healthy egos and all that stuff. Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah, some thoughts on from what you're describing, essentially, to realize you are the I, that you can't see itself. That's why meditation is kind of, it makes all the sticky contents of consciousness slippery. And when they fall away, you never discover consciousness. In fact, you discover it when you completely conclude that you cannot discover it. And that's only because everything has fallen away, essentially. And then as a forced, almost like physical rule or law, you find yourself, because you've realized you are nothing in your experience, and that's all that's left. And you know it in a way that you can never find how you know it. It just forces itself upon you, essentially, almost mechanically. And then that's why I said people describe that as consciousness, but that doesn't necessarily follow that consciousness, because I've had experiences where I didn't know I was conscious, but when I came to, I was more restful and felt more grounded in whatever reality is than any sort of sleep could ever give me. And I felt like I touched reality, right? But it wasn't an experience of pure consciousness. It was yeah, it's, who knows what the hell it is. It's lights out, in some sense.
Yeah.
So, that's why sometimes people call it being or mystery or pure mystery or something like that too. That's another part of it. But consciousness does make sense.
Cool. So the last thing I'm going to ask is not, are we ever going to figure this out? Because but more so, what do we even have? Does anyone have an idea what even a solution would potentially even look like? How do we even know how we'll ever, if and maybe and this may be the same question twice, do we even know how we'll know when we know?
And
how will we know when we've answered the question about consciousness or reality? And then do we have any idea what that could look like? Are we expecting it to be a math equation? Are we expecting it to be an image in a microscope? Like, how do we, do we even have an idea of what it could look, what the answer could look like?
Yeah,
you don't have to know. I just kind of thought of this out of nowhere.
Yeah, no, I'll just give you my thoughts on it. really to answer that, to really hunt down the if we were to spend our whole lives looking for that answer and say like we could find it, and then we died, we would probably have missed the most important thing of life, which is again playing the game, not sketching how the game goes out on a chalkboard. But so what would it look like? You know, you think like who am I? Like if I could re-represent myself on a holodeck, you know, in the most innate detail, say total Star Trek, every little cell, every little, like the mitochondria is all in the proper place and all that, just crazy, like all the blood cells flow and they're actually all in the, it would still only be a copy of me. It wouldn't be actual me. So the only answer that satisfies is to the maximum human degree, I think, is mystical experience, which is to let go of trying to have that answer completely. But we are human beings and we do have minds, and it's extremely powerful and very supportive to have that mental assistance in the breadth of our experience. So it's hard to meditate, say like if you have rickets or something like that, right? And meditation is, although there is something to be said about psychosomatic healing, you know, meditation can free you from a lot of, I won't say trauma, but stress from erroneous views of your own self and reality. And so that relief of stress could heal your body, because stress, most doctors I see say 80% of illness is strongly impacted, if not caused, by stress. So maybe if you relieved a lot of stress, you know, that would help and show you things. But yeah, I don't know, I'm losing my train of thought here.
It's an easy train to get lost on.
Easy train. I just got lost on the train there.
Yeah, no, but in terms of science though, like, is there theories around what that could look like? What a solution could potentially look like?
A physicist is going to tell you a math equation, like what's the theory, what's string theory, right? Anybody, a meditation teacher is going to tell you, maybe sound like what I'm talking about right now. Okay. But if they don't really know, if they're kind of I hate to say like a fake teacher or something like that, they might say it's Buddha mind, or it's God, or it's this thing that you have to find, and this is the thing, and that's the answer, it's God, right? How many people just say, you know, what's the purpose of reality? They say it's for God's will, but that's putting a theory into play. That's putting a theory in place of the real thing. So I would say really all we can do is have loose ends at the ends of all our theories, and that they can expand out and get more rich and more rich. I kind of look at it like a video game. Like I used water in video games. I don't know if anybody's gamers, but water is really tough, I imagine, to model, because you're taking math essentially and you're trying to make it look like fluid. That's crazy. But as the math gets more and more complex, it seems like the water just looks better and better and better in video games. And it comes to approximate, maybe at some point it'll look like actual water. It'll maybe fool us. I'm sure in movies, it probably already has fooled us and we don't want to admit it or something. That would be a theory that can account for, one, it would have to account for us, our perception. So neuroscience is critical, not just how does the things within our experience, so like the matter, like the quarks and the electrons and the you know, tectonic plates and all that stuff in space and gravity. I mean, that's a big part of it too, but we have to map intimately our perception of those things, which has a huge impact on our sense of reality. So if we can map those two things in richer and richer terms, we can come to closer and closer approximate whatever our domain of reality is, which probably is finite. We're finite creatures, or I like to say. So I think it's fun to try. It's, you know, the better we get, the more we're going to be able to influence our experience in a more higher quality way. But to really make that your purpose of life without understanding the ground of your own experience, which is facilitating all that, is to miss a lot of life, I think.
Yeah. And I think to kind of close that up, I have taken your advice in a way and decided that I'm not interested in, I mean, maybe one day my goals will change, but for now, I am trying more to become to become comfortable with not knowing than to be so attached to knowing. So even though at first I thought compatibilism is not even possible, I think that I'm probably more compatibilist than I realized I was. in that I think, like I don't want to miss out on the fun just to try to find the answer to the equation. So, so yeah, so Paul, thank you for exploring this with me. If I haven't seen many other questions, if anyone wants to ask any questions, you can raise your hand or put things into the chat. If not, we're gonna start the breakout sessions in a minute. We've already started splitting up the room, so if anyone again wants to jump in real quick and do the raise hand or just kind of unmute themselves and jump in. I know this is a tough one, but also do keep in mind that for the breakout sessions, you do not have to talk about this topic. It is often the conversations are spurred from the main topic, but that is far from a requirement. We're just a bunch of friends hanging out, talking about whatever we like to talk about, you know, usually psychedelic related. So I see two hands. So I'm gonna start with Javier here. So unmuting him.
Yeah,
Javier,
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you for I was thinking about this, it came up while you were talking, that, you know, with the current situation that's happening with the pandemic, I'm realizing myself personally that I'm valuing myself more, like human connection, like actual human connection when I meet with people physically, whatever that means. And I do feel that with everything that's happening today, like we're spending more time on screens, like that's a fact, most people. And again, it's pretty cool. Like we're having this conversation right now, which I find fascinating. But I do like something, again, that I can't explain really, but it feels to me that we're kind of forgetting that, or maybe it's just me, that the importance of human physical connection within the guidelines that we have to follow. And yeah, I would just like to know either of your opinion on that, like, and how you relate that to, because in the end, I tell myself, like, I don't know, is there a difference between interacting physically or not? Because in the end, like, it's all consciousness, or I don't know, like, what would be your thoughts on that, if you can share, either of you?
I'll take my crude take at it, and then Paul can put a little icing on it if you'd like, is that my personal take, even though is that my personal take on it is that reality, consciousness, all these things have wouldn't apply here, because all of what you've described, whether or not people can make a certain connection in a certain way or whatever, to me that's all still in the realm of human nature and our, you know, animal nature and our social ability, and like, then, you know, so to me, like, the two things, you know, whether kind of like being in person is more powerful than not or something, that's still all, to me, that's in the realm of just of the human experience of what's in our minds and kind of subconscious things, like, so I don't think it relates to consciousness. So again, that's my crude take, and that it's all happening just within our personalities and just like kind of the way we are. But Paul may have a completely different take on that, which is why I wanted to answer, because he might have a very different.
Well, okay, so yeah, you said something that's a thing for me. So it's weird. It's funny that you said it that you know, it's all just consciousness, anyways, right? So from my take, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is something that spurred in me, is that this idea that, okay, it's all just consciousness, that's often played around with in the same sense of that it's we're all one, right? So it's all just consciousness, we're all one. We're all different thoughts in the mind of God, if you will. So, and you said it in a context where connection doesn't matter, right? So, and that makes it makes very logical sense. It doesn't make relational and emotional sense. And I think extreme spirituality, which is what mysticism is, sometimes gets into this, where basically unity experiences. So we call them, we're going for this unity, this ego dissolution, this unity experience where we're one with everything. So it literally feels like that. it literally feels like you're one with everything. That's because your ego is dissolved, right? So of course, and you can, and there's ecstasy with that. There is a sense of unguardedness with that. And so, and oddly what that does is what it doesn't mean is that things are literally unified. I just said it literally experiences like that, but that doesn't mean it cognitively when you think about it. To relate to anything, to have connection, to even say that things are one, that means there has to be two. If there wasn't two, you couldn't even say there was one, because one is opposed to two, or opposed to zero. So unity experiences require discernment, they require separation. And so I think the unity experiences go too far many times in how they conceptualize things. What it is that your ego dissolves and all your defensiveness goes down. So you actually become more open to connection. And connection requires distance. You can't connect with, I can't connect my hand to my hand. I can connect my hand to this hand. That's connection, right? You can't, this is literal batshit crazy oneness, Actual oneness is that there's no barrier between these two hands. It's like we're one, So that's consciousness should bring us together. The whole point is it shows us what's possible as far as coming together. Not only just, we can be around each other superficially, but we've got our facades on. Even so, a persona is a facade we put up to hopefully sculpt other people's opinions. An ego is a persona we put up to ourselves to sculpt our own opinion about ourselves. Okay, so ego dissolution, you not only discover yourself, but in the universality of our humanness, you discover everybody else in their basic sense. When you experience other people, though, because the borders are down, and a unity experience is probably using the right hemisphere more, it's dealing with your direct sensation, not categories. You're not mentalizing life. You're meeting, you are reality, and you are your humanness, and they are their humanness. And so you're seeing them for who they are, and they feel seen, hopefully. Some people can't handle that, but they actually feel seen. So it's an immensely satisfying and enduring feeling of connection. And that's the whole point of going to unity experience and taking psychedelics. And in times like this with the pandemic, obviously it's rough. I would say that this deeper sense of love for people and connection, it comes with a lot more hurt too, because now there's so much more value and preciousness in being what you are and what other people are. You don't want to be without it. But also, usually you have to develop a lot of equanimity, which is an allowance and even-mindedness to not react so much, to allow the difficulties and the blissfulness of life, and to let it kind of flow through you instead of trying to hold on to everything and manipulate.
Yeah, non-attachment, basically.
Yeah. Well,
sounds like it.
Yeah. But I would say I want a mother to be attached to her son. I want her to freak out if her son is bleeding out on the floor, and I want her to yell at me, "Son of a bitch, get out of my way! I'm going to the hospital." I want her to attach to her kid. So it's even having equanimity with that. So I don't know if that's what I had. I mean, the pandemic is just making it hard, right? For me, it's made it better because it's pushed everybody onto Zoom, and I like weird people. I like exotic, into consciousness, into science, into all this stuff. And I have found more people in the past 6 months of like mind than I ever have, because everybody's being pushed onto the web. So I want to be around people physically, but I take it as an opportunity to have equanimity with difficulty, and to deepen my practice. So that's what
that makes sense.
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. So we got one more question, and then we'll jump into the breakout rooms. I think we're just going to do one breakout room session, because of based on the time. So Tim, if you're still with us here, I'm going to unmute you. And if you still want to ask your question, you just can go ahead right
Absolutely. Now. Yeah, first of all, thanks for this is the first one I've made since your last talk, Kenny, and exact same way it's kind of unified a lot of different things I've been learning about at the same time. The question I have is, in terms of kind of that weirdness and panpsychism, and that I was a radical materialist until I discovered psychedelics a couple of years ago, and it was kind of very rewarding to explore the kind of the weird realm. And specifically, I've found kind of lineages like Gnosticism and Hermeticism go quite a good way for explaining, say, the which I thought was absolute bullshit before. Like, even though it's not empirical, it seems like it's got some weight to it. I'm curious if either of you have explored them and what your kind of take is on those, I guess, schools of wisdom.
You blacked out, or your audio for me blacked out right at the important word that you just said. What was the functional word, the ideology?
Hermeticism and Gnosticism.
Oh, Hermeticism. Okay, yeah. I don't know if Kenny's familiar.
I got nothing on that. I got nothing on that one, Paul. It's all you.
Okay, so I'm less familiar with Western traditions than I am with Eastern, but I've read a decent amount on them. So Gnosticism is Christianity. It's what happened. Just for anybody who doesn't know, it's the tradition that happened after Christ died or whatever, and his teachings proliferated. And actually, we have so little about him, but it was more of a mysticism. It was more of, you can be Christ literally. Like, it wasn't this toned down version of Christianity where everybody, nobody can be Christ. He was the only man. He was the bad mamma jamma, and nobody can equal him. He wasn't, Shaft, essentially, like, like we make him freaking Shaft. So anybody, just like in Buddhism, anybody can become a Buddha. Hermeticism, hermeneutics is interpretation. I think that's more of Greek mysticism. Am I correct in that, Tim? Yeah.
Great.
That's the one I know least about. So you're saying, and you said you were a materialist and psychedelics change your mind, which is that's so neat. I love hearing that. If you've caught it in my talk, in a sense, I was not on necessarily either side, but in a way, I've come back around that spiral to where, I'm definitely went into the conscious camp, and now I'm trying to integrate that materialism and the mind and the pure consciousness. So I think I need to hear your question again, maybe in a more succinct format. What was your question specifically?
It was mostly just a stab in the dark to see if and I think my mic is coming in and out, but whether or not you've found ways to explain the weird or the extreme elements of mentalism. I find those Western kind of esoteric Western philosophies provide an explanation of the law of attraction could well actually have some legitness to it.
I see what you're saying now. Okay, yeah. So there's alchemy too, right? Alchemy is huge into that. Yeah, they're huge into that, where they're putting a name to everything. Same with, what the hell is it? Masonry, Freemasonry, Rosicrucians. They've got, you can be a 33-degree Mason, and there's symbols that they give you for each one. Each symbol expresses some sort of dynamic about life. All it is formulating teachings, right? So that's fine. So one of my things I like about Hinduism is that they formulate a lot. They really get down to describing things, and they like to put it in colorful terms, whereas Buddhism is more, it focuses on the emptiness of words, right? Whereas Hinduism kind of allows their words to mean something. In the West, we tend to allow the words to mean something as well. So it is a double-edged sword, right? So you put weight in the words, and that gives motivation to use them. And they do, words themselves are psychedelic, meaning they manipulate consciousness, right? So if something is put in the right place at the right time, it can move your mind in a way that undoes itself. So the whole point is to release the mind from its grips, you don't want to be against gripping. Like I said with the mother and the baby, gripping is important, but you don't want to be unconsciously, I could say it's like caught on an electric fence where you can't let go and you're frying. You need to be able to just touch that fence and go, oh shit, that's too hot, and pull back. Concepts, Ramana Maharshi put it, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but he said the whole point is there's these thorns in us that are giving us pain, and you can use a thorn to get rid of thorns. You can use mind or mentalized symbology to get rid of mind. But at the end, you have that thorn, that very last thorn that you now no longer have any other thorns to get rid of the thorn. So the very last one, you have to figure out how to drop straight up. It's like going cold turkey. So use maps and models and things as per your intuition guides. But to me, to have a practice of both letting go of all that in a radical, extreme way, and also being able to take those things up in a radical, extreme way and have that dynamic. And if something's not working, switch to something else. That's my sense. I hope that, I don't know if that answered your question or covered it.
It does, and I want to be very conscious of time, but just as a last point, I think that'd be fascinating for a future talk, because I believe to get the most out of experience, you really need to surrender, but you get nothing out of a wild psychedelic experience unless you have the discipline to actually reintegrate that. And I think there's a lot of nuance to that could be talked about.
I agree.
All right. Well, you have just volunteered. So we'll talk. So Christoph and I will follow up with you soon, and let's see how that goes. No. So thank you everyone again for your time, and thank you for the questions. This was really fun. Paul, thank you for letting me bounce my questions off of you in front of everybody. It's been really fun, and hopefully we didn't lose too many people there. It was very deep, a little different than what we normally do, but I really enjoyed it, and I hope others did as well. Normally we take a break here, but given the time, I'm just gonna, if people need to use the restroom or anything, they can do it while they're in the breakout room. So I'm gonna just stop the recording right now. So again, thanks for everyone coming, and we'll see you next.